If you're in property management and you're not at the MX Summit, what are you doing? Join us September 16th through 18th in Rapid City, South Dakota. The Maintenance Summit is the only conference laser-focused on property maintenance operations, where the industry's sharpest minds come to level up. Think cutting-edge strategies, priceless insights, all-inclusive meals, killer entertainment, and the can't-miss MX Showdio, a Western experience you'll be talking about all year. Oh, and the Turnover podcast. They're going live from the main stage. Seats are limited. Don't miss the event that sets the standard. mxsummit.co.
Welcome to The Maintenance Mindset, an audio-video podcast brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Paul Rhodes. And over the more than 3 decades in the apartment industry, I've had roles that include being on site, providing services as a vendor, creating and delivering multiple education programs, and active association work. This podcast is centered on the often overlooked role that our on-site maintenance workers play. You know, the men and women that respond in the middle of the night to the toilet call, or the after hours, it's really hot in my apartment request. Or my favorite, my ring fell down the drain, get over here now. In other words, the often unsung heroes who are responsible for asset preservation and resident satisfaction. Working in multifamily maintenance provides interesting, sometimes amusing, and often fascinating stories and viewpoints. My encouragement to you is this. Whatever you do it with a maintenance mindset. Hey there. Today, let's talk about a subject that I don't think gets enough airtime or conversation. And that's the topic of safety. No, don't turn your screen off yet. Don't listen in. I know a lot of the discussions that happen around safety are looking at logs and all the various requirements and what has to happen. Today, I'd like to look at safety in the way that we've looked at other topics, from 2 different frames of reference. In other words, I would like for us today to look at safety from the perspective of the person doing the work. In other words, most cases are technicians. And the second perspective or frame of reference I'd like to use is from that of the leader. Most often, this will be either the maintenance supervisor or the property manager, possibly even regionals at our communities. And where this topic has to begin is with an understanding for both of those frame of reference where our safety equipment is expected to be provided from. In other words, where it's coming from. This starts from a regulation in OSHA's, the Occupational Safety Health Administration, their standard 1910.132, which has a corollary in 1926.95. Yeah, I'm not going to go into depth about it, but ultimately what it says is that it is the employer's responsibility to both provide and ensure the use of safety equipment where and when necessary. Now, the reason why that's important for us to look at from those 2 different frames of reference goes back to the very first question that I firmly believe every one of us needs to be asking whenever we start a new job with a new employer, or even if we're self-employed, because these 2 frames have a specific place in the answer and the corollary question. The question that we need to ask is, who is responsible for safety? The answer to that question is the person that looks you back in the mirror in the morning. Yes, that means I, Paul Rhodes, am responsible for Paul Rhodes' safety. Now, the problem is, how do we make this concept real? In other words, how do we bring this into reality? That's where the leader comes into play. And that's why we have to look at this from those 2 separate frames of reference. You see, as an employee, it's my job to do the job. I need to get the work done. In order for me to get the work done, not only today, but to be able to come back and do the work tomorrow, I have to do it in a safe way. That means the responsibility, since my leader is not always going to be around whenever I have to do something, for me to ask permission, for me to be sure that the way I'm going to perform whatever task it is safe, is that I have to be responsible for my own safety. That means it's up to me, Paul Rhodes, to ensure whatever steps are necessary, I have to take the time to do them. A key example of this is a product we've talked about in various episodes before, using gloves. Now, gloves like these, commonly referred to as mechanics gloves, are absolutely fantastic. As a matter of fact, recent episodes, we've been talking about water heaters. Here, I guess about a month ago now, by the time this was airing, I found a water heater and I sourced and I've cut it open. I'm going to be doing some filming on it here, both for various opportunities and classes. But while I was cutting it open, I was reminded very specifically that as I was taking my Sawzall and cutting jagged edges down the side, I know for a fact that had I not been wearing these gloves, well, actually not these gloves, these are new pair because the pair I was wearing at that time got ripped up. And that if I wasn't wearing those gloves at the time, it would have been my hands that got ripped up. And not only that, I would have had to go to the emergency room. And chances are I would end up having stitches right here. What I'm saying is, when I was cutting apart that water heater, it was just me in my garage with my Sawzall, with the blades and that power tool. Nobody else was around. I was the one who had to make the decision. And I actually had to make the decision. I'm standing there. I've got all my tools ready to go. The drill, the Sawzall is in my hand. My finger's on the trigger. And I stopped for a second and said, wait a second. I'm about to cut metal that the surface at the edge of it is now going to be razor blades. I put the saw down, went over to the shelf, and got my pair of gloves. Now, that's an example of something that I'm doing at home. So there, obviously, I am completely and totally responsible for my own safety. But what about on the job? According to OSHA, it is my employers, my management company, you have to have a person in order to deal with responsibility. So it's my immediate leader's responsibility to ensure that I have the gloves. Whose responsibility is it to use the gloves? Still mine. So that's why there's two frames that we have going on. Our leaders at the property, for many of them, personal protective equipment becomes a checkbox, something to do at various times. And while, yes, it starts as a checkbox, when we begin working at a property, our job as leaders is to issue the safety equipment that our employees need. Things like safety glasses, gloves, protective footwear, if those are issued as a part of, even hats. If you've seen me out and about, you'll notice that more and more I'm wearing something covering my head. That's because I'm getting this solar panel for wisdom to where I'm losing the hair on top of my head, and a sunburn on the top of your head is not a good thing. My dad had a large patch removed due to skin cancer, and my mom has had some removed as well. I want to prevent that. As an employer, as a leader, I want my people to not have to go through that as well. I shouldn't say my people, the people that I am responsible for. That's what that OSHA code is. So let's look at, as a leader, what we should be providing. And as a worker, as the person who's doing the work, how we're supposed to actually be wearing these things. We'll begin along the lines with safety glasses. Now, my safety glasses these days are a little bit different than they once were because I used to be able to wear contact lenses. Now, when I wore contact lenses, the safety glasses that I actually wore a lot more often were much more cool than these are today. The ones I happen to wear today, an awful lot of, they are, well, they're a little bit nerdy. Yeah, they fit over my glasses. And as a worker, I have to wear these type because eyeglasses in and of themselves are not safety glasses. In other words, when we're using the key machine at our properties, when we're using a grinder, a saw of any kind or type, we are expected to wear safety glasses. As a matter of fact, now, whenever we go and we purchase a screwdriver or a hand tool that requires movement with the possibility of shedding metal pieces, we are expected to have protective eyewear on. This is probably one of those items that is vastly overlooked. And leaders, our job is to ensure that our workers have what they need, not just when they're hired. They have it when they need it. That means that I actually would prefer to see a maintenance technician that uses their eyewear and keeps it on them. Meaning, as for those of you who are in video right now, you'll notice I have it hanging right here from the collar of my shirt. Other cases, maybe we need to invest in a case or a cover for glasses so that we can put them in our toolbox and have them handy. Because just like an umbrella when it rains, we only need the umbrella when it's out in the car and we're inside the building and it starts to rain. That means we need to be sure that we're empowering our employees to have and keep safety gear with them at all times. A case, a cover is a good thing. Now, for those of you who don't have to wear glasses, more power to you. But you still are required to have safety eyewear. Safety eyewear, there are standards for what it has to have. And one of the big things that it has to do is have these side protectors right here, because that safety protection for when something flies, it's magical. Little pieces or particles, wood dust, whatever it is, it magically can get in between and around the side of glasses. We need to protect our eyes. Early in my career, when I was a pool builder, we were building a pool in a backyard, and I happened to be cutting rebar. I was using a concrete saw that had a diamond blade on it to cut the rebar. Now, yes, I admit that's probably not the exactly correct tool for use, but it's what I had and it's what I was using. The rebar I was cutting was 3/4 inch thick, which means that a hand grinder would have taken a long time to cut through it. And a Sawzall, I would have gone through 4 or 5 different blades. So I'm using this concrete chop saw to go through. It's a saw with a diamond blade to go through the rebar, and I'm cutting it. And yes, it's shooting a lot of sparks, but I've got glasses on. At the time, I was wearing contact lenses. All of a sudden, one little spark, and I swear it was like a 3D movie. It came right at my eyeball. It hit my eye. I, real quick, turned the saw off, put it down, reached up, and grabbed very carefully the contact lens out of my eye, and embedded in it was a metal shard. My contact lens had actually stopped it from going into my eye. I am very fortunate. I have met people who have done the same thing that are not so fortunate. So the lesson is, wear safety glasses. It's not something to just check off on a box and say, yep, there's one right near the key machine, or yep, there's one right near the grinder that's in the shop. Maintenance technicians, frame 1. Have it with you all the time. Frame 2, leaders, ask, double check. When you see an employee doing something that requires the use of safety eyewear, pay attention and notice it. If they're not wearing it, safely interrupt them and have them go get it. It's okay to pause and take a little bit longer. Even better, spend a little money on a case that will keep them nearby. Have them safely transported in a tool bag. Our eyes are some of the most needed protection items that we can get. Now, along those same lines, we need to be sure that we're taking care of our hands. Now, we've already talked about the gloves and mechanic gloves, and commonly they're referred to as cut gloves because they will prevent a injury from a knife from going through. Several of the gloves, even more than the ones I was using there, have a higher protection rating. They use materials like Kevlar that prevent razor blades from going through the fabric. But there's other gloves as well. There's even more durable ones like work gloves. There's those leather ones that you use if you're using a lot of working outside. Use shovels. Those are designed to help prevent abrasion, meaning blisters, and they can help prevent calluses from forming on your hands. The ones I really stand behind are these. And I happen to carry them same way that I expect our maintenance technicians to do when I'm working with them as a leader. Exam gloves. There are myriads of things that you and I get exposed to through the manner of doing our job that exam gloves can come in handy for. Toilet, plumbing work, drywall work, when we're doing tile, when we're working with chemicals, swimming pool, adding chlorine, all of these various things, we in other words, the expectation is there that we are wearing these gloves. First thing, I happen to have very large hands. Unfortunately, suppliers most of them stop at and only provide up to extra large sizes for hands. My hands, I need double extra large. If I am a worker and I'm needing gloves of a certain size, it is my responsibility to bring this up to my leader and say, hey, the extra small gloves that we have, they don't fit my hands. In order for me to be safe, I need the proper size. That's a part of the OSHA requirements. Not only that they provide safety equipment, but that safety equipment is designed for the person who's going to use it. The second thing is, once I have them, I need to use it correctly. That means, once again, leader, if you see your worker who's doing a job that requires safety equipment, 1, provide that equipment. 2, reinforce its use. This not only means when they're not using it that we safely interrupt them and have them go get it, it also means that we acknowledge when it happens. Meaning, if I have my maintenance technician who is installing chlorine tablets into a chlorinator, and he's outside, so he's wearing the eyeglass protection to protect his eyes from splashes, and he's wearing gloves to protect his hands from the calcium that is used in that chlorine on the very, very low pH, slightly acidic scale. as he's putting it in, when he's finished, I am going to let him or her know that I acknowledge the fact that they use gloves. Not only that, it's a good idea every once in a while to ask, hey, how many of those do you have left? My properties, I always ensured that every technician had 2 of whatever safety equipment it was. One for them to use now, and a second pair or box or supply for them to use when those wear out, because all safety equipment will eventually wear out for whatever reason. Where gloves, especially exam type gloves, are concerned, be absolutely certain that we're aware of how this is supposed to function. Meaning, I go do a job, I put the glove on. When I finish doing the job, take the glove off. Do not allow our workers or yourself to walk around all day long wearing the exam gloves. I can't number how many times I've gone onto a community where I see maintenance technicians who were doing what I have to assume is a necessary task, and then they're walking outside the property. They're not picking up trash. They're not in the dumpster. They're not doing anything else, but they're walking along wearing exam gloves. This is one of the absolute worst things that we can do, because the skin on our hands, it is very thick. Has multiple extra layers, especially on the front of our hands. We get calluses and we build up, and that's a part of how our bodies prevent future damage. It gets thicker. The problem, though, is if we wear gloves for longer than is necessary, particularly exam gloves that don't breathe, the skin on our hands gets too soft. Those calluses begin to leave your fingers. It's my understanding the subcutaneous fat that builds up in between the layers of the skin, when it's too moist, that fat begins to break down and become less adhesive, so the layers of our skin slough off. In other words, by wearing the gloves for longer than is necessary, and they get wet. I mean, how many times, workers, have you been working outside wearing gloves properly, and when you get finished, you hold the glove up, pull the side out, and you get water, sweat that comes down? That is trapped against your skin, and unless your skin is allowed to dry out, you will suffer an injury. Use the safety equipment only for as long as is necessary. Hats are the same way. Only wear them for as long, or that's where some people wear, I guess it's the trucker hat, or even better, the MMN hat. When we're wearing hats, these as devices, they're wonderful. My problem with this style hat, I think it's called a trucker hat. My big challenge is the mesh back. I end up having sunburn there. But what that means is I have to be very cautious when I'm wearing a hat that doesn't have the mesh back. I need to let my hair breathe. Make sure it's not getting overheated. Use the equipment properly for what it was designed for. Another thing that we need to be aware of, especially when we begin looking at safety equipment, is our footwear. The shoes that we end up wearing. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with safety boots and safety shoes. First, maintenance technicians, frame from the worker. I know that not all safety boots and shoes are comfortable to wear for long periods of time. Do yourself a favor and try some different ones out. Employers, be very aware that safety boots and shoes, by their nature, are more stiff than our athletic wear. the running shoes, the walking shoes. By nature, safety shoes and footwear are less comfortable. That means be sure in whatever your policies are that you give your employees some leeway. One suggestion, if I could make, do ensure that whatever footwear is being worn is anti-slip. And by that, meaning when you get onto a wet surface, the material that is found on the sole that ends up coming in contact is much, much less likely to hydroplane on the water. Be sure it's also non-marking. That comes in handy on a lot of the hard surface that we end up having. There is one piece where safety footwear comes into play, and this is where my preference is that I don't want to see a maintenance technician wearing running shoes or athletic footwear. The reason being the material on top. It's quite frequent that we end up dropping things on our feet. And if we just have that fine, thin, very, very breathable mesh on top of our feet, we're going to get injured way more often. So my preference as a leader is that my workers wear something that is more substantial than the thin fabric that we see on most running shoes. For running, that's wonderful. It's not an activity that I particularly enjoy, but there you're using footwear that was designed specifically for that. On our properties, I want to see a working shoe, or even better for the ankle protection, a boot. Now, another controversial part is the toe. Does your management company, does your employer require a protective toe? Now, closed toe, yes. Closed toe shoes are absolutely, completely required for us as employees, because the cutoff, if I'm remembering correctly on the OSHA standards, is that we are frequently lifting and carrying items that weigh more than 8 pounds. Therefore, we are required to have closed-toed shoes. That means, gentlemen and ladies, as a maintenance technician, if you're responding on call after hours, you may not respond in flip-flops. I would ban clogs as well. But that brings up a cost or another topic. Is toe protection, commonly referred to as steel-toed shoes or boots, is that required? For our industry, no. For your insurance, maybe. I'm going to leave that up to you as a preference. I will let you know these boots here, which are the ones that I wear when I'm on properties, they are protective toed. But since I go through TSA, I can't use steel toed. These happen to be Kevlar. So they carry the same protection as steel, but they're not steel-toed, as it were. There are even newer ones now that are ceramic. They're even lighter than these. I'm very happy with these, and very, very these are very comfortable. I wear them all day, even when I'm training. I'm standing up on my feet. I actually have some pairs of athletic shoes that are less comfortable than these boots. And that's kind of by design, because these boots I spend a lot of time in, and technicians, we're going to spend a lot of time in. Now, leaders, if you have a standard for footwear at your community and you have a technician that reports for work without the appropriate footwear, send them home. If we don't start acknowledging safety equipment usage when it's required, and acknowledging the fact that it is being used, then nothing's going to change. we're going to continue to have a lot of preventable injuries on our communities. That, more than any other topic, goes to the use of lockout, tagout equipment. This is required per the OSHA standard. I can't remember the exact number in OSHA because it's referenced a lot of times. I do know that one of the top 5 most common citations from OSHA is failure to use, provide, or have lockout, tagout equipment on a work site. For our properties, what that means is, and the specific language is very similar to the fact that anytime a form of energy is in use, a worker who must provide service on a piece of equipment that uses, stores, utilizes, generates, or has as a part of its operation any form of energy, that equipment must be made safe. It must be locked in a safe position and rendered in such a condition that it may not be re-energized or used until the person who's providing the service removes that restriction. In other words, on our communities, maintenance technicians, if you have to go do anything with electricity where your service diagnosis is going to expose an electrical circuit, connections, or equipment point, you are required by OSHA standard to take that piece of equipment and turn the breaker off, meaning we disconnect it from the electrical power. But that's not enough. The next thing is you are required to have a piece of equipment like this locking tab here. For those of you on video, this is a breaker lockout. And what you do is you place it on to the toggle and then tighten it down. By tightening it down, it makes it to where that toggle cannot move. Once the toggle is locked in place, that begins that first two steps of lockout. That means we've turned it off, we've disconnected it from the energy source, and I have made it so that it cannot be easily turned back on. But the third piece is that it can't be turned back on until I, as the worker, say so. That's where the lock comes into place. Depending on what it is you're working on, it is possible to do this with a zip tie. But the third piece of that is the tag, or the fourth, I guess, if we're numbering. The tag. The tag identifies this as a dangerous piece of equipment that has been made safe. So it goes into the lock, and then we close it, and I take the key and keep it with me. This is the requirement. But remember all of that big, long language that we were just talking about? Lockout, tagout is not only for electricity. For instance, this is a locking device which is used for a ball valve. This particular ball valve device, it functions because our ball valve right now, for those of you who are looking on video, when the handle is parallel with a standard ball valve, that means the valve is open. When I need to close this valve, I turn it so that now it is perpendicular to the valve, and that's a ball valve. Locking it is required because the water that's inside this valve is under pressure. Not to mention the fact that if I'm about to cut a pipe farther on down line, if this is not off, I'm going to make a mess. But what about the fact that I might be working on the pipe and I can't see this valve? I can't tell if somebody's coming along, and maybe I've got the valve cut off for a building and I'm in apartment number 312 and apartment number 313 wants to take a shower. So they call the office responds and says, oh, I will send a maintenance technician. And my coworker, Janet, comes along and happens to see, hey, the valve is turned off. Well, of course it's turned off. That's why the shower's not working. So Janet then comes along and Janet turns the valve back on. And by doing that, they solve the work order. But now I'm in the apartment making a mess. Lockout tagout is required for plumbing as well. So if we've got our valve closed off, the way this ends up functioning is there are two parts to this. One part, you end up sliding over the handle, and you'll notice it locks on one side of the valve. The other part locks against the opposite side of the valve, so that when it is installed on the pipe, it gives me an opportunity to put a lock in place. And again, I would put a tag on this. Leaders, our maintenance teams should be using, the expectation needs to be set, observed, and enforced that anytime our maintenance workers go into using any form of energy, by the way, where plumbing is concerned, that includes hot water as well, because that's thermal energy. Anytime our workers go to use any form of energy, lockout tagout is required. Okay, but if I'm the leader, I'm in the office, I'm on somewhere across the country, maybe I'm in another state as a regional or as a corporate leader, whatever it is, how can I know if my worker is actually using lockout tagout? I'll give you the answer. Workers, maintenance technicians, maintenance supervisors, if you're doing work that requires lockout tagout to be used, put it on the work order. Document it in whatever form. If you're writing work orders still on paper and pencil, which still does occur, put LOTO in there. That signifies that it was used. If you happen to be using a cell phone and you're tracking your work orders, put the letters LOTO in the documentation on the work order right next to what it was that you did. That way you're documenting that you are keeping yourself safe. It also means that off-site leaders, you should be able to pull up a work order that in the description requires the use of disconnecting energy. Something like replacing a light fixture, there should be LOTO denoted on that. By doing these things and incorporating both frames to where workers, you have what you need and use it. Leaders, you not only identify, but you acknowledge the use of safety equipment. All in all, everybody gets to be happier because one, we begin to decrease the number of scars and visits to the emergency room. And two, we have overall less lost time at work. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you somewhere. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Maintenance Mindset. I hope you take away ideas that apply to your current and future career goals. Please check out Maintenance Mindset Minute to hear short-form, high-impact, applicable, maintenance-centered information. Whatever you do today, do it with a maintenance mindset. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other industry podcasts, thought pieces, and sponsorship opportunities. I'll see you somewhere.